Thank you for joining us for the Poetics of Portraiture. I am Greg Sandoval of John Paul Getty Public Programs. It is my pleasure to welcome you to today's artist conversation with April Banks, Dwayne Paul, Glenn Wilson, and Ricky Wright. This program is presented in conjunction with the upcoming exhibition Photoflux on Shuttering LA, which will be on view at the Getty Center when the galleries reopen to the public on May 25th. I am joining you from my home in Los Angeles on the traditional ancestral unceded territory of the Gabrielino Tongva peoples, with honor and respect for the deep history of this region. Before I introduce Jill Moniz, guest curator of Photoflux, I wanted to share a couple of program details. Live captioning has been enabled. In order to turn it on or off, click the CC button for subtitle options. Also, feel free to submit questions to our panelists at any time during the program through the Q&A function. The exhibition Photoflux on Shuttering LA was organized by independent curator Jill Moniz and features 35 acclaimed photographers with ties to Los Angeles communities. The primarily Black, Indigenous, and people of color artists in the exhibition have radically transformed photography to express their own aesthetics, identities, and narratives. Jill Moniz is an independent-minded curator of visual narratives. Her curatorial investigations launched from her project space, Quotidienne, and the nonprofit Transformative Arts support local artists in site-specific installations and exhibitions that create much-needed visual language for the greater good. Her noted exhibitions in Los Angeles include LA Blacksmith at California African American Museum and The Riddle Effect at Craft Contemporary here in Los Angeles. Jill, I hand it off to you.
It is my pleasure to introduce the second conversation around the Photoflux on Shuttering LA exhibition at the Getty. These four artists are part of a community of makers that are working to disrupt portraiture's white gaze and its effects on the Black body. Each artist you will meet tonight has their own unique, compelling visual language that communicates the depth and the complexity of what it means to be Black and free in this world that presents such a challenge and danger to our pursuit and sustainability of our histories, memories, Black futures, and freedoms. I am honored and incredibly grateful to call these artists my colleagues and my friends. We have built networks of support and opportunities for joy and made spaces like this exhibition at the Getty to show the breadth of our experiences. For me, the beauty of these artists is that they focus so keenly on pleasure and what it means to deny the performative aspects of trauma that seem so prevalent in today's consumption of art made by artists of color. They have committed themselves to this work over the collective decades of practice, and I can't wait to hear their discussion that I know will deepen your own engagement and personal visual literacy with the exhibition opening later this month. Ricky Wright is a photographer and filmmaker based in Los Angeles, California. Her work explores notions of community and sisterhood, especially among Black women, and looks at the ways a community can mold and expand our ideas of gender, sexuality, and belonging. Her work also investigates beauty, politics, and desire through self-portraiture and various other mediums. Dwayne Paul is a multidisciplinary artist whose art practice concentrates on the fractured, fragmented memories of childhood, strung together and conflated by his adult reflection on past memories and experiences as an Afro-Caribbean immigrant and a gay man living within the Black American experience. Through various modes, the nature of Dwayne Paul's studio practice represents a conduit to the Black body and the Black experience to explore ideas within the social zeitgeist of the historic and current moments. April Banks is an artist educated as an architect. Her transmedia practice sits between photography, installation, and collaborative experiments. Her work has been exhibited across the US and internationally. In February 2021, she completed her first permanent sculpture, A Resurrection in 4 Stanzas in Santa Monica, California. Raised in the woods of Virginia, April has called California her home for 25 years. Glenn Wilson is interested in the intersectional, synchronized visual recordings of the rhythm of life, particularly in his Oakwood neighborhood of Venice, California, and other diasporic sites. I was honored to curate his recent solo exhibition, Slim Margins, at the Very Small Fires Gallery in Los Angeles. Glenn has been featured in group exhibitions at the California African American Museum, the Museum of Contemporary Art Los Angeles, Honor Fraser, Charlie James Gallery, Quotidian, and the Torrance Art Museum, among others. Wilson received a BA from Yale University and an MFA from the University of California, San Diego, and is a Schomburg Research Fellow from the New York Public Library Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture in New York. It's with great pleasure that I hand it over to Glenn.
Thank you, Jill. Thank you, Getty Public Programs, Greg, for organizing this panel. It's an incredible pleasure and privilege for me to join Dwayne, Ricky, and April, three artists whose work I take inspiration from and I consider colleagues. Can't tell you how many times I've walked into spaces in Los Angeles and said, damn, whose work is it? And then it's one of these three artists. And oftentimes it has to do with the fact that Dr. Jill Moniz has such an interesting way of connecting the disparate community, the disparate practices of so many artists in LA. And she does it in a very distinct way that not many curators in the city do. So without further ado, I thought the intro was amazing, of course, but I wanted to extend that just a touch. It's called The Poetics of Portraiture. Every one of these artists is multidisciplinary artists in terms of the media that they use to communicate their ideas. So I'd like, just for starters, to ask each of you to help me, help any of you who are tuned in, seat themselves in the language of your work, either in terms of describing how you approach your work, where it's generated from, and maybe discuss a piece that we just saw that's part of Unshuttered and PhotoFlux. And, Dwayne, you want to kick it off?
Great, thank you.
Yeah, man.
Somebody's got to go first.
I love it. I love it.
That's fine. Gentlemen first. Let's see. My work typically is primarily abstract when you're talking about my studio practice. When it comes to my sculptural work, my painting work, the figure seeps in when it comes to photography, when it comes to making imagery with the camera. I don't necessarily consider myself a photographer in the terms of the traditional sense, but there's an attachment to making imagery with the camera, with the readiness of the digital device or the camera itself as a tool, as it would a paintbrush or a chisel, to record or analyze a particular thought. It could be a fleeting thought that I catch at a moment with a photography image, or I might be stimulated by, let's say, within one of the images you saw a piece of lace, which is fabric, and what that particular, especially the color white lace, what it invokes. It invokes, femininity. It evokes virginity, if that's a word, being sort of purity is where I'm going, and it talks to the access or the lack of access, as it were, at a point that gay men didn't have to sort of like concrete their bonds with their chosen mate, especially that I'm from Jamaica. And this is still in a island country where this is taboo, and people are being, murdered and disenfranchised just because of their nature of their birth. So that was a conversation. That's why I kind of like the series is titled "One Love," which is a line out of Bob Marley's song. and sort of like that idea that here's a beautiful nation of people, but we still have this issue around sensuality and sexuality and who has access to display that in a public forum. And so that's where that particular idea came from. Abstractly, it's just playing with the notion of a clearly male body beneath a veil, that, white veil, which is, the offering of, of a female, typically, in the marriage ceremony. So that's where that imagery came from. And just a sort of like the juxtaposition of, quite honestly, black and white in that particular imagery, and then just sort of like on display. And as it moves through, I think I did maybe 8 in the series. Just sort of like quickly taking that picture and shifting my mind into receiving, into being on display, and all that goes into a marriage ceremony or wedding ceremony, with that it's not necessarily so much about the male at this particular time, it's about the focus on the female, and that the female is being offered to someone. And that's even weird in its inception in my brain.
Mhm.
But sort of like playing with that kind of, the male gaze, or the gaze of what society and the public sees when they see that, those kind of vestige, which is a veil, a marriage veil on a male body, on a male Black body. And we'll talk about that, even in the Black community, that Black gay men have a particular stigma, and still are working through that. Never let, let alone the kind of the idea of offering oneself to one's mate as a partner, and all that conversation that comes up within that. So that's within the abstract nature of how I usually work, whether it's, sculpture, whether it's painting, or, making, let's say, making concrete these kind of weird abstract notions. It's playing with those ideas in a visual format.
Subverting expectations.
Exactly.
Yeah, we'll get back to that for certain. Ricky, would you like to?
Yeah, I mean, that was an amazing explanation of the work. I feel that I also touch on many of these concerns and topics within my work, but my practice started out with photography as my visual medium, as my way to release and ask certain questions within myself, within my own family dynamic. My family is really integral to my work and to how I even came to understand what I am trying to capture visually. My practice actually began and was birthed out of the loss of my mother, and realizing the lack of seeing tangible evidence of myself, of my sister, through imagery. I would sit with my other family members and friends and see the memorabilias, the books, and just seeing that visual, that evidence of being there, of having existed in a period of time, and not being able to see myself in that period, because I feel like the matriarch is usually the person who takes this careful notice and puts these things together, and keeps the history. And I decided to take control of that, and I got a camera when I was around 13 or 12, and began to that was the goal, to just see myself existing, see my family existing, making sure truth was told in some way. Not having your mother, that is, you lose a lot of protection in some way, and not many people are in that space caring. So that is where the visual aspect came, and not even knowing it was like photography in that way, the traditional sense. It was more so to keep record. And this transpired into a way where I was able to use my camera in this medium as a way to visually ask questions within seeing this evidence. So capturing my family, I became intrigued with just community within the familial dynamic. And the images that you saw were from a series called Sis, that is short for sister. And my sister and I are 11 months apart, and our mother passed away. I was 1.5 and my sister was 2. And we have this really intense bond, which I have come to identify as my first form of community in some way. I feel like all of my first instances with any type of conflict resolution, sorting things out, being angry, being jealous, competition, these things that we experience in our interpersonal relationships within our society, I was recognizing that in the familial dynamic, and especially pertaining to sisters and siblings, these are your first instances with these. So they kind of form who you are and how you respond to certain things within your world. And there were interesting things that I found out within my own dynamic, and that led me to want to have more conversations with other sisters, and creating portraiture within itself, which is kind of the basis of the photography that I do. It's a way for me to have conversations. It's a way for me to engage with a person in a way that it's a more intimate situation for me. I feel that my subjects I usually have a relationship with. It's usually family, friends, who I'm either capturing a moment or helping them get through a moment, and sitting just within that area of my practice, the intimacy, I developed relationships with sisters that the series is an ongoing series, but most of the images, like the one that we'll be showing in this show, is sisters DJ and AJ, who I met when I lived in Miami, and I became really close with them and their mother. And the mother was usually on set with me while I was shooting and helping me style her daughters, and just having this like actual ecosystem of community outside of the practice as I'm trying to investigate community within my practice. And yeah, that's, as well as portraiture and photography, I felt like some of the imagery actually had more of a conversation, and the images started to speak to me and started to move. And that's how the moving element of my work became. I started to create, my first short film was an experimental short film called Sis, which just was me visually expanding and actually putting voice to the imagery that I was creating, the still imagery that I was creating. And so within the piece, I have a poem or just a series of questions and statements going throughout the piece, where each statement starts with the mini sisters. And I'm just trying to ask my sisters, myself, my community, my found family that I've created. So visually, I feel like I've created a way for me to have more conversations within filmmaking, and experimental filmmaking has allowed me to kind of not only keep this linear or just like kind of disrupt the traditional sense of whatever linear filmmaking is supposed to be. I use all parts of my archive, all parts of the archive that is available to me. The access that I have within being born in the South and being able to go back home to Alabama and talk to my grandparents and be able to just like record conversations and record my kind of like a remigration and going, because after my mother passed away, I moved to Illinois. And so remigrated in college. I transferred from Eastern Illinois University back to the South Alabama A&M University when I was 21 to kind of just reconnect with that. I think that there was a maternal yearning of wanting to connect with where my mother was from and what space she was occupying before she passed, and just really wanting to get into that space. And that led me to really have a newfound understanding of the richness of where I'm from, Tuscaloosa, Alabama, and the richness of just the spaces that I had crossed throughout my childhood, and the land itself. My practice has transformed into working with the land in a way where I'm molding and creating with the land that I'm actually from in ceramics and pottery, and just creating,
Beautiful.
yeah. So I'm sorry.
That's all right. That's all right. Let's. I don't want you to. I don't want you to. I want. There's many things you just said. I want to.
Yeah, I
so-
feel like
It's all good. So
April.
the archive. A couple of things. Something you started with and you kind of returned to is talking about the archive and the feeling, like understanding the strength and the presence of one's own archive, which is a nice way to sort of hand it off to April.
Yeah, I'm starting to see why Jill chose, us out of the, to be a part of this talk out of the larger group. There's definitely a lot of similarities. I say my work is image-based. I did start with photography around the time of over 13. I took a photography class with my father. But mostly, I think I didn't have the courage to take photos of people. So I mostly was looking at lines and space and composition in black and white. And at that time it was in film. And then sort of kind of put it down while I was, going through my architecture phase, as I call it. And then when I returned to my artist self, just really became fascinated with archives. And then, which brings me back to the image. And so the work that's in the show and the work that I've been making as a part of probably 5 different series is looking at the missing information that's in archives. So in this particular series in the show, I made in Senegal, and I am extracting the portraits of a French colonial photographer and repositioning those people into the present day architecture, and which are my photos. So my photos are of the architecture. And I was really just interested in, like, who are these people? What was the circumstances under which these photos were taken? Were they willing participants? There's so much I like to read in a photograph, especially in archives. Sometimes I just go through archives, Library of Congress, Schomburg, or some of my favorite ones to just kind of dig through. And there's so much information about like posture, and so that's how I usually make the selection when I'm doing these. I call them historical fiction. So I'm really just looking for one or more things to match up in I guess they're digital collages, but most of them look pretty seamless. So the idea is that it becomes a new story. And I'm interested in, all the information that's left out because these stories are not being told by the subjects themselves. They're being told by, in most cases, the powers that be. And in the work that's in the show, it's the, French colonial gaze. And in particular, the work that I selected were from postcards. So it was a common thing for, European photographers to go to Africa, West Africa in particular, and, make these postcards that were either considered ethnographic studies or just anything that was, I feel like, meant to be a spectacle. And then, these were sent back home. And so there's something about this analog crossing of borders, this, sending of information in a way that we don't think about now because everything is digital, but just the way that these images and these stories were transported, and the people not having any agency in that. And so I'm interested in kind of repositioning, restoring, and one of my series is called Refable. And it's literally about looking at the gaps in the ways that history is told, and finding sometimes humor. I did one series where I wrote a Tinder profile for a bunch of unidentified men in the Library of Congress archives. The description will be like a young Black man with a 2-button jacket and no other information, no date, no name, no location. And so it's like, these are people, they had a story, they came from somewhere. And so, yeah, trying to find some joy, some levity in recreating what these stories might have been.
I like that idea. When you said historical fiction, is this, as you said, links with my approach as well, is that you approach you get a notion, right, of something historical, and you want to examine it, as you said, reposition it, and say, okay, how do I look at this from my point of view in 2021, in this contemporary time? I did a piece. It's a sculptural piece, and it and also playing with titles and with language and words. And it's it was called Sexual Awakening Cut Short by a Glance. And that was my take on the Emmett Till situation, right? Here we have boys, men, women, girls, people coming of age, coming into their sexuality, their sensuality, and the fact that you could just have your life snuffed out by a simple gesture of acknowledging that you are attracted to someone. That, and that for me loops back into, being a person, a man of color, a gay man of color, and how that also translates in that you can also be, have your life snuffed out, whether it be physically snuffed out or have your way of making a living snuffed out, just by exchanging a glance. You might, since we're always being watched, now we have cameras, then it was just folk on the street. Like you always knew who was involved with whom by the way they look at each other. And it might be in a crowd situation. You always know where the connections are. So the idea of just sort of like changing a glance and saying, oh, I looked at this at the time, white lady, which of course we know now was a lie, and whistled, how that could impact upon your life in such a horrible, detrimental way. Is something that I want to examine, because it's something you couldn't control, right? It's something that it's so innate as a human being to have an attraction and to pursue that, and that you can't sort of like hide your desire, and someone picks up on that and then uses that as a tool to either oppress you or make your life, a living hell, or basically murder you. So a lot of the times within photography, I primarily use the camera as self-portraiture. And it might seem that I'm really into my face. I'm not. That is just what's available to me.
It's a beautiful face, Dwayne. It's a beautiful face.
Thank you.
And there's nothing wrong with.
My father thanks you. My family thanks you.
And it's, go ahead.
I'm just saying it. As you know, it's the ready tool that I don't have to go outside and say, "Hey, will you sit for me for this thing?" Because sometimes by the time you move through all these these machinations of getting people into your studio, the idea is gone and you're bored with it, and you just want to sort of like readily do it. And that's why the camera is so wonderful, to have these conversations either with yourself, and then you put it out there in the public, and then have those conversations live on. I don't know how that people are going, what glance, if you take what they're going to take from that imagery, or what they extract, or what they interject into that imagery. But I'm here for it. If it generates conversation, then I'm happy to have that image exist in the world. And also positioning the Black skin in society into you know, into media in from my gaze.
Mhm.
So that's why I love the idea that you guys are also exploring conflict and resolution. How do we resolve these historical facts for ourselves? Because we didn't live them, you know, as Black folks, we can only, oh, you know, if I lived in, you know, 1862, I would. Well, I don't know what I would do, but, you know, I know what I can do now and what I can use to explore those ideas and explore what and put myself in that place and say, okay, if this happened, how would I then would I then either push against, or what would be my protest? And, you know, as artists, my protest, you know, fist is my visual language. So that's, and the camera is one of the most, you know, ubiquitous ones that we have. And to use that to position imagery that has context and subtext is sort of like what I like to play with, and what I think we're all playing with.
Yeah.
Can I jump in here real quick and say there's so much that you all just said. First of all, unapologetic self-regard is just something I wanted to revisit at some point. Utilizing photography for it, you know, it's been weaponized, we know historically, in terms of how it's framed, so-called marginal communities. You brought up Emmett Till, the glance, but then there was also the glimpse of the casket, right? And his mother's decision to
Display
the image, display the disfigured
bloated
residue of her son, because she knew the power of how that image would travel, right?
Exactly.
So I think about that in relationship to when you talk about the ubiquity of photography, and photography being this medium which at each step of at each iteration of its technological growth or advancement, if you want to call it advancement, it's become more democratized. And you know, we were all still during 2020, and we all know the flood of images that besieged us. We all probably had our own personal relationships to those images as we watched our society react to those images. So Jill mentioned joy, and joy is fundamental to everyone's process on this panel, no doubt. But engaging memory and the instability and stability of memory is also a big piece of it, and also working through the layers of trauma that have been visited on our community through representation. So with that said, April, I was just curious if you could walk us through your mining of the archive of images of the burning shotgun homes that this part of Resurrection in Four Stanzas, which I recently visited, and is absolutely, I just can't wait to just keep going back. It's like almost like a temple. It's got a really beautiful, elegant presence.
Well, thank you. Yeah, again, it's so there are actually a couple of pieces missing from the sculpture, and it's two historical images that are as a pattern. We're just doing some slight calibration on it. So all of the cut pattern in the sculpture are about casting shadow and about moving light. And so the idea is that even though this is a fixed sculpture, you're supposed to be moving through it. So for those that aren't familiar with it, it is rebuilding of the shotgun house, which is a typical style of architecture in that neighborhood. It comes from the South, and it's thought to have migrated from the South with Black people during the Great Migration. And so this particular neighborhood in Santa Monica, which was a Black neighborhood destroyed by eminent domain, had these kinds of houses. And there was a media spectacle made of burning the houses. So in the process of eminent domain, they had justified burning it by saying that these houses were blight. And I was struck early on in the research process by the violence of this image and the spectacle of it. And so I wanted to react to that image. I wanted to rebuild, but also in response to all of the community engagement and understanding the importance of place and belonging and staying power. It just seemed like the right symbol to represent the dreams of people who came. Like they came to Santa Monica because they wanted, you know, the good life by the sea, by the beach, just like everyone else. And so to me, the house represents these thresholds. Yes, it's about memory. There's something sacred. Yeah, and so I'm in the work that was done around leading up to the sculpture, like working with students. So, you know, we talked a lot about justice and joy. And so the idea is that like kind of like what's the thread between this past erasure and not just now, but like in the future. So, you know, there's the activism part of it. How can you become involved in your local government? Understanding what these discriminatory practices are around redlining that still exist, gentrification, all of these things, but also the importance of your own family archive, and that our bodies are archives. And so, yeah, just trying to find these moments of joy and imagination in working with students. I feel like that's the way that it shows up most for me.
There's an interesting thing about the legibility of a burning home. You know, everyone can read that immediately. As you said, creating the spectacle, and you talked about the postcards. I thought about you know, the lynching postcards as well. It's a way to communicate a set of ideas far and wide, broadcasting an order or hierarchy. So to reposition that, reframe that, you know, revisit that in a very activated way, I think is very powerfully done. One thing I thought about when I was at that piece, when I visited the piece last week, as a matter of fact, is that was my first neighborhood when I moved to Los Angeles.
Wow.
And I came home and I said to my wife, I was like, do you realize your apartment was in the historically Black neighborhood, you know, what is it called? The Belmar Triangle. Is that right?
Yes.
And then we moved to Oakwood here in Venice, also the historically Black section of, and there's residue, there's atmospherics, there's echoes, you feel it. You're not in, it could be the Southern style architecture that you're likely to encounter in Shreveport or New Orleans or Mobile or what have you. Now you're seeing it in Southern California. Or,
Yeah.
you know, sort of what you were saying, Ricky, about going home to your familial, ancestral homelands, and you feel that,
residue,
right?
Yeah, that residue,
So pick up on that, because when I look at your work, Ricky, I'm like, I said this in my notes, the and the color palette, those are actually full-on characters in your work. All of your work features one or two or a grouping of characters, but there are these other characters, which is the atmosphere. And how do you work with that?
Well, that atmosphere was just came from the atmosphere that I actually occupied mostly, spending time in my grandmother's living room and actually just absorbed by the warmth and walls full of sepia tone photos and wood frames, and the walls were actually wood, and the carpet was just like grungy burgundy, just older carpet. I mean, that furniture stayed, I mean, still there to this day from my birth to now. And really, in the maternal search or just yearning that came naturally or instinctually, I was seeking to find that same feeling within my own work, or it just not, I was seeing or finding that this toning my work in this way, or using this specific lighting, or using just the warmth or that tone was actually bringing me to what felt most maternal. And so that's definitely, I guess, speaks to residue, or just speaks to where I come from, or just like traveling back and trying to grasp onto, or stay connected to, or stay tethered to in some way, where I'm from and where I was born. So I just, oh my God, there's just so many things that the connectedness between the works, and just bearing witness to, or redefining this reimagination. And I guess that's where the joy comes for me and within my work. I'm so blessed to be in this space where I can read works such as Saidiya Hartman's Wayward Lives, Beautiful Experiments, where immediately just a full account of reimaginations and what ifs, and what if we would have went this way, and repositioning these horrible and horrific situations that occurred, and investigating the gaze, and investigating the way we use this tool, the camera, the lens, and just reading so much with an image. I forget which one. Just like.
Ricky, I want to say that in looking at your images, right? Not just atmospherically, but they do dredge up a sense that you're a smell and taste as well. It's almost like, a pot of like gumbo or something steaming up a kitchen, and the patina of the image, it's like, it's this, oh, there's some good stuff happening here.
Something's happening.
It's like, oh, it kind of transports you to a place. So when we access joy, right, we have that link to color. There are certain colors that you're like, oh my God, or a combination of colors. It might be, a scarf your mother wore when baking your favorite cake or whatever, or, you remember, a fun outfit your parents wore, and you're like, oh, oh, they had it going on,
Or
it's all this kind of like stuff that you have trapped, and then you recreate them and re-examine, especially for myself, if you're a small person and you don't really have words, as kids, we kind of collect all this stuff, and then as we grow up into artists, and we're nurtured into artists, and and you start to sort of like play around with imagery and textures, and you kind of like your body sort of like shifts to a way of making imagery, or a particular kind of making a photograph.
Exactly.
Or a conversation that you always come back to. So that's kind of like when I see the panel imagery, like for instance, Glenn, like he's right now, the image behind him, we talk about histories and reclaiming them. Is the idea that we're reclaiming them, and we're rooting them so that they're not lost, right? They're not sort of told in a way to sort of like whitewash them. And so it's like the imagery should be confronted. It should say I I was here, they were here, we are here, we're going to go forward. It's the Maya Angelou term where I know maybe it was a maybe African proverb, is that when you walk through a door as a single person, you carry your generations with you, right? Your chest is up, your head's held high, and you walk through. So you're repositioning histories with these imageries, especially, a house was burnt. And, to say that is something, and then give that an image to look at. Give that, as April was saying, let these shadows be cast, because there it is, right? We plant a stick and the shadow is cast, and you can't get rid of that, because at 12 o'clock, we're gonna get that shadow. And you have to deal with it. And I think that's what the imagery that most of us are working within in producing is saying here, look at this, examine this. It's presented to you in a way that is controlled by the artist, but you can bring your own experience to it. But what you're not going to do is bring a false experience to it.
Yeah.
I'm gonna piggyback on that, Dwayne. That's beautiful. I didn't know if I was gonna read the quote or not. We have about 15 minutes left, y'all. Certainly, I know we can leak a little bit over, but this is almost 100-year-old quote. Langston Hughes, a great poet and collaborator. One of the things I love about Langston Hughes is how fierce he was at collaborating with other artists. But it's from 1926. Deborah Willis, who was my mentor at the Schomburg Center, brought me into the archive there way back when. I'll tell you how many years ago. Excerpted this in her book, Posing Beauty. Quote, "We younger Negro artists who create now intend to express our individual dark-skinned selves without fear or shame. If the white people are pleased, we are glad. If they are not, it doesn't matter. We know we're beautiful and ugly too. If colored people are pleased, we are glad. If they're not, their displeasure doesn't matter either. We build our temples for tomorrow, strong as we know them, and we stand on top of the mountain, free within ourselves." I just liked, there's a lot there, but the fact that I was tripping on the fact that it was almost 100 years old, and here we are, 2021, and I was thinking about temples for tomorrow, that we build our temples for tomorrow. And I remember during the last year of 2020, clarity and stillness, so often taking to my iPhone and flipping through Instagram, which is one of the few platforms that I engage with on the daily. I'll be real. And you know what? The sheer joy that I felt every time I saw one of Dwayne's Selfie Imperfect pieces pop up on the screen, just like it immediately brought me to this place, this very present space. And so I'm thinking, we have past, we have future, and we have the present, but I don't necessarily want to focus for this last 10, 15 minutes on the present as much as I'd like to talk about the idea of presence versus absence. So in the title of this particular series, Dwayne, Selfie Imperfect, in which, I mean, a brother of a certain age, I'm looking, I can't help but look and see, like, compare myself to you when I see the self-portrait. And so it's this kind of a collaborative gaze in a way. It's like, I see myself in you, and yet I see the distinction of myself as well at the same time. A kind of a disciplined approach that is echoed in the technique that you're using photographically. And, I spend a lot of time behind a camera, as you know. So I know how precise your technique has to be to get the types of images you get. I know, Ricky, that when I look at your images, there's a lot going on to create those images. There's definitely a sort of an improvisational, gumbo, as Dwayne said, that happens, but you also get good at that. You get good at making a gumbo, right?
Yeah.
But then in the title, you say selfie imperfect. And so between this gorgeous body that is sculpted, the disruption through veiling or materiality, and then the technique of the photography, like, talked a little bit about that series and the title.
Imperfect because we are all imperfect, right? I mean, this body is rotting as we speak. We're examining, I'm examining, a process of aging, and that's not to say that's a bad thing. It's to say that it's an acceptance of this thing that is happening. Every time, I named it that, but just to say that this is an imperfect thing, because the idea that one uses oneself as the subject matter can go off and be interpreted as vanity. And I didn't want that to be the case, that this was about vanity, right? About us, about the exalted magazine beauty. It's titled that to say I'm examining something that's a little more abstract than just the physical, right? As a self-portrait is supposed to do, I think, is to, I like to say, is it can be viewed or it can be seen, right? If you want to, go into the poetics of words, you can view something and, okay, I viewed it, but did you really see it? Did you examine it? Did you take the time to really see the thing, like seeing a person through and through, or getting a certain glimpse of something? When you talk about technique, and the technique is sometimes, you heighten, the light to get more wrinkles, or to see the pores in a face, right? Not to, and then sometimes it's about moving away from that, so then that the costuming then tells the story more, and then the body is just, it helps to move the story along. If you're thinking about the veiled pieces, the veiled work, it's that. It's like, oh, the skin's a little bit more porcelain, right? Because anything that when you uncover a veil, I guess in the story is supposed to be this really wax beauty that is presented to you, in that kind of, oh, here I'm presenting something for you to take as a gift in a marriage ceremony. But in other ones, like I believe what was in the billboard was Suffocation and Clarity is another series, and it was and the idea of sort of like you have to get to a certain point of suffocation before you find clarity. Right. So that series has coverage of plastic, and there's a reveal, and when the final reveal of the final image is this kind of very heavily contrast and clear face that is showing bone structure. It's showing a very determined gaze out to the public, to the viewer, and what does that say is that there's some clarity there coming through. Of course, these are all abstract ideas, and I don't know if they work or not, but they work enough for me to put one out on the platform and say, okay, here it is. This is what I've done. Go with it. Let's see if it's seen or it's viewed.
Right. Okay.
Especially when you talk about the platform of Instagram or the other technologically driven things, like how many people stop and actually see the imagery? And like you can go through the feed of Instagram, and then you go, oh my God, here's an arresting image. you know, and it could be portraiture through an abstract notion, like, you know, with April's installation, and you go, oh, there's something here, right? If she chose to make the house yellow instead of red, would I have stopped, right?
Yes.
If it was just plain columns with no cutout that gives me a shadow or something to look through and investigate, would I have stopped at this imagery, you know?
Right.
And with Ricky is, you know, does this patina, is it just a image of, you know, women with their backs turned, you know, says something than them facing you, right? It's like, oh, here's a moment that you're kind of like trespassing on, right? You're intrigued, because it's not that they're saying go away. They're having a moment in this photograph that you would like to investigate, and you would like to have be a part of, and know what the story is. So that's when I said, when you talk about when I titled itself the series of anything I post on Instagram, and it's Selfie Imperfect, it's about that idea of investigating, you know, just life in general, that we're not perfect beings. And some days I might feel pretty because I'm having a damn good day.
Yeah.
And some days, you know, the news just upsets me.
I love this concept, just because I think my way of approaching this a similar concept is the kind of the way that I approach lighting some of my images. I'm very inspired and drawn in by imagery that is not lit in a way that is so inviting in some ways. I feel the approach that maybe Roy DeCarava took in the shadows and just like the natural light of that moment. I rarely use artificial lighting in any of my images, because what is there is what's there. And also what I am seeing in that moment is actually what I'm wanting to capture. I'm not wanting to duplicate a moment or wanting to create a moment, unless that's the approach that I'm taking. But just that desaturation and that underexposed image that actually does force someone to come into and to see. And I think that's a way for me to actually force that in a way to see me, you know, and see us. And so no, I'm not gonna do you the favor of illuminating any more light upon us, you know, and just forcing that in a way within my work and within my, it is a challenge. I've had to fight for my work within larger publications like the New York Times, or it's like, yeah, this may not be journalistic, but it is received.
You have to lean into it. It's kind of like when someone speaks a little softly, and you have to sort of like, you lean into it, you know, you're kind of invited in to say, like, I'm not going to shout at you. Not everything is a big, bold conversation.
That part.
It's just, you know, you say, oh, there's an interesting story. So you creep up to the conversation, right? And you turn your ear, and then you get this great story, and you're like, oh my goodness, if it was loud, I might have been rejected from it, right? Because it's quiet and it seeps in, you're like, oh, I got that lesson, you know, I have this knowledge, and you know, here's a story I can take and make with it. I think that's kind of like where what I get from most of your imagery is that it's quiet, very boldly quiet and inviting. Yeah.
And also the safety within that invitation, the safety within that invitation.
Exactly.
It is an invitation, the fact that we've been presenting it, you know.
And, can we hear from you, Glenn? You're part of the show.
Was that?
So can we hear from?
Yeah, no, I'm just enjoying. I'm enjoying.
About your,
yeah, I think one thing that I'm sorry. Do you have something you want to?
Well, just about your work in particular. I know you're here to moderate, but you're also an artist in the show.
Yeah. I think one thing I've been thinking about quite a bit during this conversation is the idea of fabric, and the intersecting lines that are necessary to create fabric, and the fact that fabric, whether it's a lace or chain link, and as I've been visiting quite a bit in my work, it is about tension. You know, it requires tension to hold itself together, and then the way that it lays across or the way it's engaged can either reveal that tension. It can, this piece that, where it is, that Dwayne was talking about behind me, was one of the first portraits that I did in the chain link material. And I was kind of mesmerized by the way in which this material that I'm so used to associating with division, or sort of this industrialized kind of hard barrier, softened. And then I started I sort of repositioned my own viewpoint to see that actually when folks use chain link as the line of demarcation on their properties, that between public and private, the sort of crossing of that threshold or a veil, that it's a screen, and it's permeable, it's visual, you can see through it visually, it's not a divisive material. And so I started thinking about that in terms of how the neighborhood was changing and the markers of that change. And so often when these homes get knocked down, these homes that are owned outright by a family, it's been in a family for 40, 50 years, and then just in a blink of an eye, someone comes and throws down a bunch of accumulated wealth that they have apparently in their bank accounts. And overnight, the place gets demolished. So I really, I was starting to feel, we moved to this neighborhood because we saw ourselves, we wanted to raise our sons in a place where they would see themselves. So these, these changes, there are markers to these changes. And I basically started thinking about these gates as objects of collective memory. And I started collecting the gates. And then, my practice as a street photographer, I'm always photographing. Everybody in this neighborhood knows I'm the photographer dude, So I then started utilizing some of these images in the fabric of the chain link. So there's a little bit about what I do. So there's resonance across all of your work for me, and I've really enjoyed just sitting back and.
But with you, Glenn, I mean, historically, what you're doing also is repurposing the discarded, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is what people from off the African continent, who forcibly immigrated to this soil have done. It's what was discarded. We have to make anew. Mm-hmm. Right, so that's what you're doing with your wonderful work. You have I think it might have been in your show with the picture of the boys.
Yeah.
Right, and they're almost silhouetted, right?
Right.
And it's the idea that here we are. It's not a barrier. It's almost, as you said, a weaving, and that's what you do. You I know your process. So you do a photograph, and then you make it a whole again. You take it apart. And then you make it a whole again, and just the lines of the chain link now help to seal that imagery. It does not take it apart, and that's one of the sculptural tension in the work. That's combining photography and a physical discarded object that someone's like, oh, it's a rusty fence. What are we going to do with it? Well,
really,
we're going to use it as a poster. As an edifice to say, we are here, look at us in this, look at me, I have history here, and I'm rooted here. I think that's what a lot of the imagery says to me. Community.
Come on.
I dig it. Last thing, I'm looking in the Q&A. I see that April, you answered a question on the chat. Thank you very much about your process. if anyone has any more questions, this is our one moment to thread the needle on that. And if I don't see any questions pop in, one last thing I want to say is that the show is going to open, PhotoFlux Unshuttering, May 25th. It'll be open through October 17th at the Getty Center, live and direct. You can go physically be there. I know we're all, I'm very excited to see this. I was super excited when Jill proposed the show to me. Her shows are always unbelievable. There's more information in the chat. Getty.edu, art exhibitions, PhotoFlux. And once more, thank you to the artists.
We have one question.
Okay, cool.
Kayana Watson, just speaking on, do you find a connection or similarity to Black family aesthetics and dynamics in the South and on the West Coast? I've heard textures and foods mentioned during I heard textures and foods mentioned during. What are some other images or feelings that help make that connection? I think I just wanted to point out, just tying back in that remigration. The South is in the West right now. I mean, I just feel like there's so many people that made that migration to the West Coast, to the North, and to Chicago, to New York, all these spaces. So there is this innate, people bring their homes with them in that migration. So there are so many connections here within Los Angeles here, and so many places where you can just feel that resonance of where, I'm not sure if you're from the South, but just that familiarity. So I just wanted to mention that. But also I'm just like so blessed to be a part of this conversation. I didn't even know I was gonna get fed this way, and just all of the connections. And I'm just so grateful to be creating this work that is in this space, you know.
And
redirecting.
sparking, you know, conversation, and also, you know, unapologetically doing what Langston said, you know, in his quote. You know, I feel like you're evoking not only your own family, but you're also giving some guidance as to how folks can use poetry and imagery, create the archive, and actually move forward into a future, you know, rather than residing in the space of fragmentation. You know, you have to rescue wholeness from fragmentation, or you have the opportunity to do that. And it's interesting that we're all doing it using the photographic, you know, modes of photographic engagement and poetry. There's question here.
Michelle has a question about poems. Just to answer directly, one of my great influences, Essex Hemphill, who's a great writer. And when I was, you know, knee-high to a grasshopper, I came upon his book at a small bookstore in the West Village here in one of the first gay-run bookstores. He's a Black writer out of DC, also out of San Francisco, passed away in the early 90s, but his book called Ceremonies was one of the great, it became my James Baldwin, actually. It's dog-eared, beaten up, and I hold it dearly. Just reading through it, just the power of his words, to be so forthright as a Black gay man who positively went through his life unapologetically in his prose, in his stories, in his conversation in that book, really sort of like directed me a lot as a young artist moving forward. I think she also has a question about what affects or subject choice, seen or viewed. And it depends on the day. It depends on what personally I want to reveal of myself, or what I choose to pull back. It might be in the way I approach the how I engage with the camera when it comes to self-portraiture. You know, you can either let people in through the eyes, or you can have them sort of like stop at your gaze or your stare and your body position. So that's how I sort of like gauge how much I want to let people in to that image and that particular mindset, or and gauge what conversation I want to have.
Cool. Did anyone else want to answer the question about references as far as, you know, poetry or, you know, antecedents as far as your work? I know that Resurrection in 4 Stanzas has some poetry literally etched into it.
Yeah, there's I often use text in my work. I've even, one of my early works, sewed together all the pages of the Bible, and done other kind of sculpting with paper. Yeah, there's something about the written word in particular that I'm drawn to. But the text and the sculpture, one is a quote from Maya Angelou about the meaning of home, and that how and you can never lose it or leave it. So I felt like that was really important in marking this space, or remarking this space, you know, obviously where these homes had been erased. And then the other one, and the other part of the sculpture is just a piece of prose that I wrote, wanting again to just remember beyond the trauma, just like that these were just families just living their lives, enjoying their, you know, sweet tea on the porch, gossiping with neighbors, and just a remembrance that we have the right to just be, without it being epic or
I think that's a beautiful, beautiful way to close out. Thank you all so very much.
Thank you so much, Glenn.
Get out there and see some art, see some faces for the, you know, as we start to open up. I can't wait to see the 3 of you in person and give you a big embrace.
Yes.
And to quote Dwayne's piece, his series, "One Love," y'all.
Well,
And I mean it in the way I mean it, okay?
it's not mine, it's Bob's.
All right.
I can't take claim to that.
I hear you. All right. Peace.
Peace.